Section 44 of Villette by Charlotte Bronte. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. Section 44. From this date, my life did not want variety. I went out a good deal, with the entire consent of Madame Beck, who perfectly approved the grade of my acquaintance. That worthy directress had never from the first treated me otherwise than with respect, and when she found that I was liable to frequent invitations from a chateau and a great hotel, respect improved into distinction. Not that she was fulsome about it. Madame, in all things worldly, was in nothing weak. There was measure and sense in her hottest pursuit of self-interest, calm and considerateness in her closest clutch of gain. Without then laying herself open to my contempt as a time-server and a toady, she marked with tact that she was pleased people connected with her establishment should frequent such associates as must cultivate and elevate, rather than those who might deteriorate and depress. She never praised either me or my friends. Only once, when she was sitting in the sun in the garden, a cup of coffee at her elbow, and the Gazette in her hand, looking very comfortable, and I came up and asked leave of absence for the evening, she delivered herself in this gracious sort: "Oui, oui, ma bonne amie, je vous donne la permission de coeur et de gré. Votre travail dans ma maison a toujours été admirable. Rempli de zèle et de discrétion, vous avez bien le droit de vous amuser. Sortez donc tant que vous voudrez. Quant à votre choix de connaissances, j'en suis contente. C'est sage, digne, laudable." She closed her lips and resumed the Gazette. The reader will not too gravely regard the little circumstance that about this time the triply enclosed packet of 5 letters temporarily disappeared from my bureau. Blank dismay was naturally my first sensation on making the discovery, but in a moment I took heart of grace. "Patience," whispered I to myself. "Let me say nothing, but wait peaceably. They will come back again." And they did come back. They had only been on a short visit to Madame's chamber. Having passed their examination, they came back duly and truly. I found them all right the next day. I wonder what she thought of my correspondence. What estimate did she form of Dr. John Bretton's epistolary powers? In what light did the often very pithy thoughts, the generally sound, and sometimes original opinions, set without pretension in an easily flowing spirited style, appear to her? How did she like that genial, half-humorous vein which to me gave such delight? What did she think of the few kind words scattered here and there, not thickly, as the diamonds were scattered in the valley of Sinbad, but sparely, as those gems lie in unfabled beds? O Madame Beck, how seemed these things to you? I think in Madame Beck's eyes the 5 letters found a certain favor. One day after she had borrowed them of me, in speaking of so suave a little woman one ought to use suave terms, I caught her examining me with a steady contemplative gaze, a little puzzled, but not at all malevolent. It was during that brief space between lessons, when the pupils turned out into the court for a quarter of an hour's recreation. She and I remained in the first class alone when I met her eye. Her thoughts forced themselves partially through her lips. "Il y a," said she, "quelque chose de bien remarquable dans le caractère anglais." "How, madame?" She gave a little laugh, repeating the word how in English. "Je ne saurais vous dire how, mes enfants. Les Anglais ont des idées à eux, en amitié, en amour, en tout, mais au moins il n'est pas besoin de les surveiller," she added, getting up and trotting away like the compact little pony she was. "Then I hope," murmured I to myself, "you will graciously let alone my letters for the future." Alas! something came rushing into my eyes, dimming utterly their vision, blotting from sight the schoolroom, the garden, the bright winter sun, as I remembered that never more would letters, such as she had read, come to me. I had seen the last of them. That goodly river on whose banks I had sojourned, of whose waves a few reviving drops had trickled to my lips, was bending to another course. It was leaving my little hut and field, forlorn and sand-dry, pouring its wealth of waters far away. The change was right, just, natural, not a word could be said, but I loved my Rhine, my Nile, I had almost worshipped my Ganges, and I grieved that the grand tide should roll estranged, should vanish like a false mirage. Though stoical, I was not quite a stoic. Drops streamed fast on my hands, on my desk. I wept one sultry shower, heavy and brief. But soon I said to myself, the hope I am bemoaning suffered, and made me suffer much. It did not die till it was full time. Following an agony so lingering, death ought to be welcome. Welcome I endeavoured to make it. Indeed, long pain had made patience a habit. In the end I closed the eyes of my dead, covered its face, and composed its limbs with great calm. The letters, however, must be put away, out of sight. People who have undergone bereavement always jealously gather together and lock away mementos. It is not supportable to be stabbed to the heart each moment by sharp revival of regret. One vacant holiday afternoon, the Thursday, going to my treasure, with intent to consider its final disposal, I perceived, and this time with a strong impulse of displeasure, that it had been again tampered with. The packet was there, indeed, but the ribbon which secured it had been untied and retied, and by other symptoms I knew that my drawer had been visited. This was a little too much. Madame Beck herself was the soul of discretion, besides having as strong a brain and sound a judgment as ever furnished a human head. That she should know the contents of my casket was not pleasant, but might be borne. Little Jesuit inquisitress as she was, she could see things in a true light, and understand them in an unperverted sense. But the idea that she had ventured to communicate information thus gained to others, that she had, perhaps, amused herself with a companion over documents, in my eyes most sacred, shocked me cruelly. Yet that such was the case I now saw reason to fear. I even guessed her confidant, her kinsman, Monsieur Paul Emmanuel, had spent yesterday evening with her. She was much in the habit of consulting him, and of discussing with him matters she broached to no one else. This very morning, in class, that gentleman had favoured me with a glance which he seemed to have borrowed from Vashti, the actress. I had not at the moment comprehended that blue, yet lurid, flash out of his angry eye, but I read its meaning now. He, I believed, was not apt to regard what concerned me from a fair point of view, nor to judge me with tolerance and candour. I had always found him severe and suspicious. The thought that these letters, mere friendly letters as they were, had fallen once, and might fall again, into his hands, jarred my very soul. What should I do to prevent this? In what corner of this strange house was it possible to find security or secrecy? Where could a key be a safeguard, or a padlock a barrier? In the grenier? No, I did not like the grenier. Besides, most of the boxes and drawers there were mouldering, and did not lock. Rats, too, gnawed their way through the decayed wood, and mice made nests amongst the litter of their contents. My dear letters, most dear still, though Ichabod was written on their covers, might be consumed by vermin. Certainly the writing would soon become obliterated by damp. No, the grenier would not do. But where then? While pondering this problem, I sat in the dormitory window seat. It was a fine, frosty afternoon. The winter sun, already setting, gleamed pale on the tops of the garden shrubs in the allée devant nous. One great old pear tree, the nuns' pear tree, stood up a tall dryad skeleton, grey, gaunt, and stripped. A thought struck me, one of those queer fantastic thoughts that will sometimes strike solitary people. I put on my bonnet, cloak, and furs, and went out into the city. Bending my steps to the old historical quarter of the town, whose hoax and overshadowed precincts I always sought by instinct in melancholy moods, I wandered on from street to street, till, having crossed a half-deserted place or square, I found myself before a sort of broker's shop, an ancient place, full of ancient things. What I wanted was a metal box which might be soldered, or a thick glass jar or bottle which might be stoppered or sealed hermetically. Amongst miscellaneous heaps, I found and purchased the latter article. I then made a little roll of my letters, wrapped them in oiled silk, bound them with twine, and having put them in the bottle, got the old Jew broker to stopper, seal, and make it airtight. While obeying my directions, he glanced at me now and then suspiciously from under his frost-white eyelashes. I believe he thought there was some evil deed on hand. In all this I had a dreary something, not pleasure, but a sad, lonely satisfaction. The impulse under which I acted, the mood controlling me, was similar to the impulse and the mood which had induced me to visit the confessional. With quick walking I regained the pensionnat just at dark, and in time for dinner. At 7 o'clock the moon rose. At 7:30, when the pupils and teachers were at study, and Madame Beck was with her mother and children in the salle à manger, when the half-boarders were all gone home, and Rosine had left the vestibule, and all was still, I shawled myself, and, taking the sealed jar, stole out through the first-class door, into the berceau, and thence into the allée devant nous. Methuselah, the pear-tree, stood at the further end of this walk, near my seat. He rose up, dim and grey, above the lower shrubs round him. Now Methuselah, though so very old, was of sound timber still, only there was a hole, or rather a deep hollow, near his root. I knew there was such a hollow, hidden partly by ivy and creepers growing thick round, and there I meditated hiding my treasure. But I was not only going to hide a treasure, I meant also to bury a grief, that grief over which I had lately been weeping, as I wrapped it in its winding sheet, must be interred. Well, I cleared away the ivy and found the hole. It was large enough to receive the jar, and I thrust it deep in. In a tool shed at the bottom of the garden lay the relics of building materials, left by masons lately employed to repair a part of the premises. I fetched thence a slate and some mortar, put the slate on the hollow, secured it with cement, covered the hole with black mould, and finally replaced the ivy. This done, I rested, leaning against the tree, lingering, like any other mourner, beside a newly sodded grave. The air of the night was very still, but dim with a peculiar mist, which changed the moonlight into a luminous haze. In this air, or this mist, there was some quality, electrical perhaps, which acted in strange sort upon me. I felt then, as I had felt a year ago in England, on a night when the aurora borealis was streaming and sweeping round heaven, when, belated in lonely fields, I had paused to watch that mustering of an army with banners, that quivering of serried lances, that swift ascent of messengers from below the North Star to the dark, high keystone of heaven's arch. I felt not happy, far otherwise, but strong with reinforced strength. If life be a war, it seemed my destiny to conduct it. single-handed. I pondered now how to break up my winter quarters, to leave an encampment where food and forage failed. Perhaps, to effect this change, another pitched battle must be fought with fortune. If so, I had a mind to the encounter. Too poor to lose, God might destine me to gain. But what road was open? What plan available? On this question I was still pausing, when the moon, so dim hitherto, seemed to shine out somewhat brighter. A ray gleamed even white before me, and a shadow became distinct and marked. I looked more narrowly, to make out the cause of this well-defined contrast appearing a little suddenly in the obscure alley. Whiter and blacker it grew on my eye. It took shape with instantaneous transformation. I stood about 3 yards from a tall, sable-robed, snowy-veiled woman. 5 minutes passed. I neither fled nor shrieked. She was there still. I spoke. "Who are you, and why do you come to me?" She stood mute. She had no face, no features. All below her brow was masked with a white cloth. But she had eyes, and they viewed me. I felt, if not brave, yet a little desperate, and desperation will often suffice to fill the post and do the work of courage. I advanced 1 step. I stretched out my hand, for I meant to touch her. She seemed to recede. I drew nearer. Her recession, still silent, became swift. A mass of shrubs, full-leaved evergreens, laurel, and dense yew intervened between me and what I followed. Having passed that obstacle, I looked and saw nothing. I waited. I said, "If you have any errand to men, come back and deliver it." Nothing spoke or reappeared. This time there was no Dr. John to whom to have recourse. There was no one to whom I dared whisper the words, "I have again seen the nun." Paulina Mary sought my frequent presence in the Rue Crécy. In the old Breton days, though she had never professed herself fond of me, my society had soon become to her a sort of unconscious necessary. I used to notice that if I withdrew to my room, she would speedily come trotting after me, and, opening the door and peeping in, say, with her little peremptory accent, "Come down. Why do you sit here by yourself? You must come into the parlour." In the same spirit she urged me now. "Leave the Rue Fossette," she said, "and come and live with us. Papa would give you far more than Madame Beck gives you." Mr. Home himself offered me a handsome sum, thrice my present salary, if I would accept the office of companion to his daughter. I declined. I think I should have declined had I been poorer than I was, and with scantier fund of resource, more stinted narrowness of future prospect. I had not that vocation. I could teach, I could give lessons, but to be either a private governess or a companion was unnatural to me. Rather than fill the former post in any great house, I would deliberately have taken a housemaid's place, bought a strong pair of gloves, swept bedrooms and staircases, and cleaned stoves and locks, in peace and independence. Rather than be a companion, I would have made shirts and starved. I was no bright lady's shadow, not Miss de Bassompierre's. Overcast enough it was my nature often to be. Of a subdued habit I was, but the dimness and depression must both be voluntary, such as kept me docile at my desk, in the midst of my now well-accustomed pupils in Madame Beck's first class, or alone at my own bedside, in her dormitory, or in the alley and seat which were called mine, in her garden. My qualifications were not convertible nor adaptable. They could not be made the foil of any gem, the adjunct of any beauty, the appendage of any greatness in Christendom. Madame Beck and I, without assimilating, understood each other well. I was not her companion, nor her children's governess. She left me free. She tied me to nothing, not to herself, not even to her interests. Once, when she had for a fortnight been called from home by a near relation's illness, and on her return, all anxious and full of care about her establishment, lest something in her absence should have gone wrong, finding that matters had proceeded much as usual, and that there was no evidence of glaring neglect, she made each of the teachers a present in acknowledgment of steadiness. To my bedside she came at 12 o'clock at night, and told me she had no present for me. "I must make fidelity advantageous to the St. Pierre," said she. "If I attempt to make it advantageous to you, there will arise misunderstanding between us, perhaps separation. One thing, however, I can do to please you: leave you alone with your liberty. C'est ce que je ferai." She kept her word. Every slight shackle she had ever laid on me, she, from that time, with quiet hand removed. Thus I had pleasure in voluntarily respecting her rules, gratification in devoting double time, in taking double pains with the pupils she committed to my charge. End of section 44. Recording by Leanne Fortune.